Hi, welcome. My name is Jordan Nelson, and I am going to be your host today for the live webinar called Let's Connect. As you can see, I have a variety of different supplies in front of me today that we're going to be using and kind of going over. And so hopefully you gain a little bit of knowledge about some of the supplies that I have in front of me, but also some good takeaways as well for your own needs. With that said, let's jump right into the presentation. I'm going to get that started here, and then we'll get going. So agenda. So this is, again, a rough estimate of what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about magnets. So magnets galore, right? We're going to be spending about 15 minutes giving about an overview about them, the different types, maybe some experiments that you've done or have seen that are very common with different magnets. We're going to jump into some circuitry. So this is going to be where a lot of our time is going to be spent today. And so basically what we're going to really design is, and typically I have a lot of these supplies in front of teachers or educators or parents to be able to actually use, because I feel like the hands-on component is so important. So I just, again, bear with me with some of these challenges. We're going to kind of have to use some of our imagination and some of the, if you have paper or pen or something to write down on to take notes, that's great, because we're going to be using some of that for later on. But again, giving an overview, some different materials and experimentation that we can do with those. Then we're going to jump into electromagnetism, because that kind of ties it all together. So the younger grade levels, you're tying in more of like the magnets, maybe some basic circuitry, but it's good for you to also know how that ties into electromagnetism, because there's different phenomena that you can use at the lower grade levels that evolve around magnets and circuitry that you can use, and that's why I put that in there as well, because it kind of all ties in together very nicely. And then we'll wrap up at the very end and do Q&A with 5 minutes at the end. So let's go into the very first slide that we have. It's called magnets, and I want to attract your attention, so I just kind of like to do a play on words. So let's define what a magnet is, and it's all about something that produces a field that attracts or repels other materials that without actually touching them. So that's kind of more or less what a magnet is. But we're going to get into kind of those questions about, what are the magnets made of? Because that's really important, and I'll explain why as we get into some of the other different explanations as well. What are the different types of magnets? And that kind of ties into what our magnets are made of. But then also, how are they used today, like in the environment and also in education? Because the bottom line is we really want to get students to understand why they're learning these concepts. It has to relate to real world applications, right? And that's the end result. So that's why we're teaching about electricity, circuits, magnets, and also how it ties into electromagnetism, because it's in a lot of our own devices. You have this laptop, a lot of these devices that you have at home as well. So there's ways to get students start to really think about how this all ties in to the bigger picture as well. And plus, I love getting my little magnet there saying, if you're happy and you know it, clap your, oh. So I thought that I like to add a little bit of sense of humor. So you'll see a couple of those different little fun little magnets, words and phrases as we go throughout this presentation as well. So let's go to our next slide about what are they made of, magnets made of, and the different types. So the magnets are made of ferromagnetic material, like atoms aligned. So basically what we're trying to say is that there's whether it's alloy, which is a mix of metals, whether it's iron, that's a very common one that's used in a lot of magnets. Basically what happens is there's these little atoms in there that are by themselves aren't necessarily magnetic all the time. And so what we can do with those is align those atoms where now you have the north and south pole, and then they become magnetic. And when they do become magnetic, they produce this magnetic field around them as well. And that's why sometimes we use iron filings or other different liquids or gels to be able to simulate something like that, or a metal within the liquid or gel. So one of the first things that I like to talk about is ceramic magnets. And the reason being is because a lot of students see these without even realizing it. So on your little kitchen fridge, right, you have all these little place magnets here, and they're a little bit of flexible pieces. Some are more rigid. They have a little bit more of a better design on them. So this one's from the butterfly world I attended. It was a lot of fun, but just a little memento to be taken with. These are all ceramic magnets, right? And they got different types You know, they got funny sayings. Someone who loves me went to Boston and got me this magnet. You know, it's just like those other ones you see there as well. So these are all ceramic, and they come in different sizes, right? So they come in big ones that have fridges, but most times students use these, or parents use them to attach things to the actual fridge themselves, or other magnetic pieces as well. So ceramic is very commonly seen, but maybe not necessarily known of what the actual material is. So I like to point these out at home because these are easy magnets that you can use for different experimentations. Alnico. So Alnico stands for aluminum, that's Al, nickel, and I, and CO stands for cobalt. So it's actually 3 elements that are put together. It's an alloy, metal alloy, that I really like to emphasize because a lot of people hear the words Alnico, but they really don't understand what it's all designed or what it's made of. So there's bar magnets, there's sometimes horseshoe magnets, there's a variety of other different magnets that you can use, and I try to stick with magnets that people would have at home for the sense of purpose of teaching, but there's a variety of different Alnico magnets out there, and it's just another type of magnet out there. Then the neodymium magnet. So a lot of people don't realize the neodymium magnet is composed of neodymium, which is Nd, Fe, which is iron, and then B, which is boron. So that's something, it's a rare earth magnet, and it's one of the strongest applicable magnets that you could use in the classroom at home, typically. Yeah, nobody usually uses something stronger than neodymium. Where you see these is children's locks. So typically they would have a magnet that's encased like this. Now I tore mine apart. This is what it actually looks like. It's like a little silver disc that you have on there that is traction. Notice how it's kind of more difficult to pull apart. It's because there's a stronger connection between there. It's a very, very strong magnet. So really easy to use in your classroom. So I would use a ceramic with a neodymium, only because then you don't worry about pinching. Other cases that I've seen neodymium being used are these clips. So you'll see these little discs right into these clips right here, and those are when that strong connection that they hold a lot of weight. Normally they would use something called like a neodymium magnet, and this is easy for students to be able to see. And again, this is what that disc looks like. It's usually silver in nature. This one's got chip in it, but it still doesn't lose. It loses a little bit of its magnetism, but not much. These are considered permanent magnets, so they don't lose their connectivity. So basically, things that can alter whether or not a magnet will lose its magnetism or magnetic field is temperature. So depending if it's cold or really hot, that can have an effect on magnets. Whether or not magnets are stored with other magnets, sometimes this can have an effect on magnets, and that's why you'll use a magnetizer. Oftentimes you'll see magnetizers are used for bar magnets. That's one way to get around it. Another, so those Alnico magnets that you have that are really long, depending on how long they are, if the longer the magnets they are, sometimes that can be disruptive to the atoms inside to be actually create that magnetic field. So that's something to be aware of. So you don't necessarily want super long or individualized there. So other locks that you might see at home. So your key locks, right, for the car. So these are actually really strong. It's quite large, but these are also ceramic magnets. They can be strong too. The reason why these aren't as strong is you see the thickness. This little piece right here at the very top is the thickness of the ceramic magnet. So you can see it's about 10 times the thickness. So the strength of the magnet can be determined about the size. Now, some misconceptions with that is that students sometimes think, well, if I keep stacking magnets, more and more magnets, is that going to strengthen my magnet? Yes, but it's not going to be strong as a magnet that comes as all one piece. So that's something to keep in mind. So the short answer is yes, but there's contingencies when you're working with magnets. But it's a great experiment that you can use with students. So when you first get all these different materials, what you're going to want to do is basically, if we go to that next slide, if we're going to go to present some tests and experiments. So we have a strength test. So oftentimes I will take whatever materials that I have home, whether it's, you know, the locks, these little button magnets, the clip magnets, neodymium magnets. I have a 2-year-old, that's hence why I have some of these child locks. But then I would get things that it could attract to. So strength test is all about what are the strength of your magnet. So you can start first by what is attraction, what repels. So you can test wood, glass, other types of desks, things in the fridge, stove, other different appliances. Some people feel afraid that, oh, if I touch my magnet to my laptop or my computer, that's going to disrupt my laptop. Well, not really, especially with these little dinky things. That's not going to affect it in any way or shape or form. There's actually magnets in your laptop, if you didn't know, for like the sound and some other different features. So don't worry about that if your son is going around testing little ceramic magnets or even little small neodymium magnets. That's not going to have an impact on your actual devices or anything of that nature. So again, go around the house, let's test out some different supplies, see where the magnets are. Sometimes your mom or dad might actually have a little tool in the garage that actually connects metal, like nails and other things from the floor. That's a neodymium magnet. So look for those options too as well. So tools and other things that you want to test out that are safe to use, Phillips screwdrivers, other different types. Those are kind of things that I would try to gather. If you are going to give tools, make sure there's a parent or somebody there to observe. You don't want students to misuse any of those kind of materials, but that's what you're really trying to use for that strength test. Attracting and pulling objects, things of that nature. So I would typically, if I'm doing that, I would use paper clips. Hopefully, maybe a box of paper clips, really inexpensive. I would use an X amount of number first, and I would test out different kinds. So if I have ceramic, I have neodymium. Those seem to be the only two that I could find at home. And then I would test all the different ones, and I would label, okay, so this is the ceramic magnet, the dots. I tested out, oh, look, I was able to pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paper clips. Great. And then now I would start to test out the other neodymium magnets. So the little black silver discs, and I was able to connect all of them. Awesome. So if that's the case, I would keep adding paper clips until I could no longer attach any more of the paper clips to this neodymium magnet. Now again, if it's encased from the neodymium, that's a little bit easier. Or if you have the back of a clip, that's sometimes easy too, to be able to go around. Now notice the surface area it's enclosed, and even though it's a neodymium about the same size, a little bit smaller, we're not getting the same amount of paper clips picked up. It's because the surface area, right? So the magnetic field is more or less enclosed, so you're not going to get as stronger of a pull from that magnet. So that's something to be aware of, but it's a good phenomenon for students to actually understand as well. And then I take my big, large ceramic, and again, I would be able to pick up all the paper clips. So this is one easy one. Sometimes I would use colored paper clips to make it interesting. I picked this one just because this does have a ceramic surroundings. You know, those easy applicable paper clips you can easily pull up. Those are ceramic in nature, easy to be able to use as well. So I would start off with smaller paper clips first, and then I would go into larger paper clips. And you can probably, if you're really intuitive, you can figure out what is the grams weight to these paper clips, whether it's like 1/4 of a gram or 1/2 a gram, etc. And then you can actually start to add up the amount of weight that these magnets can actually pick up, because you want them to do a little bit more math and other than just, hey, I just picked up something, I attracted to something. You want them to engage in some kind of experiment. That's what I would do with the paper clips to kind of extend that. The other thing that you can do is use a ruler and use a test to see how strong a magnet is. So say you wanted to use a button magnet, you would keep at a certain distance, and then you would keep pushing slowly the other magnets until you felt a connection or a force that actually pulled it together. And then you can measure that distance. So whether it's centimeters or inches, that's another way to kind of test out strength too, if you don't have paper clips or other different means to be able to use to track. So that's another way to measure. Something, a little tidbit you can have students do at home, very easy and simple to do. And then I would use metric and standard to also have them do some conversions, because that is another way to easily integrate some math tools that they might be able to use later on in life, whether they're for cooking or other different means. So that's what I would do for strength test. The last thing I wanted to emphasize with magnets is building a simple machine like the Rube Goldberg machine. So this is a fun activity that you could do at home. So I would take recycled goods, whether cardboard, plastics, other metals, things of that nature, and I would set up a scenario where the students have to maybe propel aluminum can to move X amount of feet or distance in a certain pathway, whether it's straight or if it's a curved path, etc. So you can use certain magnets where you can tape them on and use this repelling feature to either move, to push, or to attract and see how fast you can get through a course or create a Rube Goldberg machine where you're solving a task at the very end. These are easy ways that you can incorporate magnets into your instruction or be able to use for educational purposes. So that's more or less what I wanted to stay with at home. There's obviously more that it can do. One of the fascinating experiments that I like to do with magnets after I'm all said and done is, if you can spare it, get a bar magnet of ceramic. And what I can do is, and especially with older students, this is something that you can take it to the next level. Now, I talked about how atoms align, right? And there's a north and south pole. So sometimes I would have students say, draw me what the inside of a magnet looks like. What do you think is happening to those atoms? How are they aligning? So a lot of students will often put the ends or the north by the north side and south by south, and they'll divide it in half. And what I'll do is I will take a chisel or something and I'll break that ceramic magnet in half. And then what the students will see is, now I've just created two magnets, both each having a south and a north pole. So now we get students start to think about, okay, really, how are the atoms or particles in the magnet's charge, or how do they really look within there? And you start to get to really define this instance where these particles aren't just in one section or the other, they're all dispersed without the magnet itself. And that even with ferromagnet materials, you can create multiple magnets within the same magnet. It's a great little lesson that I would actually have to teach. Obviously, you want to be careful about who you're using it with, you know, safety glasses, if you don't want to charge or anything like that. Ceramics break the easiest. That's why I recommend using that as your experiment. But this is a great introduction to talking about the materials and the makeup of actual magnet. So that's for more of an advanced one, but you can use that as a phenomenon even for the little students as well. So it kind of depends on why you want to do it, but you can take that next level of understanding about magnets and magnetism with your students. So just a little tidbit in case you wanted to do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take all my magnet pieces. I'm going to move them out of the way because the next step that we're going to actually be doing is going to be on circuitry. So if you go to my next PowerPoint slide, let's talk about circuitry. So the first thing that I want to do is define what a circuit is. And essentially, there's a couple things in here. Electricity will flow from a source unless there is a unbroken pathway and carry the electricity back to the same source. This pathway is called electrical circuit. So basically the energy is flowing from one source and then it's returning back to the source. And typically this is known as like a battery or some kind of generator, or, you know, the pathways at home with the power lines, etc. All these different things are set up for you to be able to use that information and relate it to the real world application. So when we go home and we think about circuits, the most commonly one that you always think about is our switches, right? On and off. What is that actually happening though? What is happening behind that little panel there on the light switch when we actually click on and off? This is something called open and closed circuits. So when you turn it on, you're basically closing the circuit. So your light is being produced because it's now closed. Now, if it's open where you turn it off, now if there's a break anywhere, it doesn't matter how small, and that's why I put that in there, the circuits could be broken, right? And we all get frustrated with that, right? Because when a switch or when a light bulb goes out, there's a lot of different maybe ways that you might have to test to see if it's actually the light bulb, is it the wiring in the house, is it the actual switch itself that's broken? There's a lot of things that you might have to test out to actually confirm that, but we can use a couple of those same strategies with smaller scale set of circuits that you can use. So the first thing I wanted to do with the circuits is first introduce some common supplies that you might see. Now at home, it's a little bit more challenging to get access to just common household items that are just laying around. What you could do is use toys. Now toys are typically for younger students are all enclosed, and it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to pry them open. So what you wanna do is take off a panel or something a little bit easier. You can take off with a screwdriver that you can actually pull apart to be able to see the circuits. Now you're not gonna get into all the intricacies of understanding everything about that circuit, but it allows them to see the framework of the actual circuit itself. So when you pull back, if there's a noise sensor, or if there's any kind of other different outputs from the circuit board, or for when you turn the switch on, you can see the wiring. And so I would take them close like a bear that makes sound and things like that. I would pull it off and I would actually show the circuitry behind that. And now you want to take a toy that you are comfortable with destroying. I just want to emphasize that, because if you start taking it apart, you might break things and things of that nature. So definitely want to emphasize, you want to use something you're okay with destroying. But the students will love this because they're saying, oh, I've never opened up a toy before. It gets them thinking about what's behind all the plastic. There's something that's applicable, there's circuitry, and there's science concepts behind that, but sometimes they don't even really think about it. So when you relate it to a real world application, it's a really good thing. So again, wanted to emphasize some of the materials we're gonna be using. So this little black piece here is called a battery holder. So what we have here is just two little clips, metal clips here, bandstock clips that we have attached to like a spring and another piece here. And what this does is it holds the battery really nicely. Now batteries will always have two terminals. There's a negative and a positive, and it's always usually labeled right on the battery itself. So positive and then the negative. And what an energy source will do in a battery typically is go from the negative source, travel all the way back to the same source through the positive terminal. And you always have to have this. It's no different than when you have a car battery. You have a positive and a negative terminal. The negative is your live, or where it's coming from. So you always want to be careful with that. But these 1.5 volts is not going to be doing any kind of damage to any kind of students, but it's a great way to kind of show that. So again, negative positive terminals, easy way to put it in is put it on the spring side down, with the positive pop up, and it just kind of pops right in. It's really easy. And then to take it out, you press down on the top and it just pops right back out. So that's what a battery holder is. And these are great for using for circuitry, and a lot of teachers are familiar with that. The other thing I wanted to show are the switches. So there's multiple different kind of switches out there that you can use. There's bigger ones, smaller ones, etc. And they sometimes have little pins on here. So I would look at the very bottom first, just to kind of see how the switch is set up. So notice that there's two metal pieces here that connect these terminals to the actual switch. That means if I connect wires to these screw points, I'm gonna have a live feed. And notice that they don't cross. If they cross, they would bypass the actual switch itself. And that's why they don't cross. And this is something for your students to understand as well. So again, little terminals that you can use to connect right to here, or you can connect right to the switch itself. It kind of depends. This one is a little bit different. This can be mounted. It has two little screw holes right on there. So you can actually mount this switch to like any wood or anything else to that nature. So if you wanted to build your own little circuit boards, you could do that. You also additionally have these little screws here. These little screws can come out, but they're attached to the switch. And if you actually had wire, you could actually wrap the wire around there and screw it back in and hold that wire there. So you didn't actually need any kind of alligator clips, which is typical of what some people actually use. So that's another way, alternative, to actually use circuits without actually worrying about it. So this is a traditional alligator clip. Now I'm going to pull this back because I want you to be able to see visually what's happening here. So these are safe pieces for students, so they don't get harmed or anything else. It slides up and down, but I pull it back so you can kind of see what's happening. On the bottom here, our wires are soldered to these alligator clips, and there's different sizes of alligator clips all the time. You can buy them individually, or you can buy them with wire. It kind of depends on what you want to do. But then you can put this little sleeve right back on if you wanted to. But I wanted to kind of show you that, because that's what you're kind of doing right here, is you have just a connecting wire, just like you would in your house. It's connecting one piece to the other, except for this would connect to a switch, and this would actually connect to the actual source, right? And there'd be maybe multiple wires coming from that switch to carry out that current electricity. So again, you can connect right to the switch here, or you can connect to the screws or the different parts for your little switch. Other things that I like to use for electricity are nails. These are great. I usually use iron nails because iron create great electromagnets, but they're also conductive, right? They're metal. So this is just an iron nail that we use. It's a common one that you can use or find, but then the width of it is a little bit wider. So then we can actually start to build electromagnets a little bit later. Wire, like remember I was talking about different clips. So I actually created these myself. Notice I have a black and a red. I like to use those only because then I can have students follow a path, right? So we know it always goes negative to positive, negative to positive. So I always try to get students to start thinking about, okay, is the black connected to a red? Now, granted, this doesn't have any power source, but this allows you to be able to see and follow the circuit through the wires to show that it's going from the negative terminal all the way back to the positive terminal. This is a great way to be able to test circuits. So again, I've just used the bottom screw. I've just used some wire. I cut off the wire here and I stripped off the enamel piece here to expose the wire. And then I just attached it to my actual circuits or alligator clips. So that's all I did there. LEDs are another great source for circuitry. Notice though that there's two different pins, and I don't know if you can probably see from there, but there's something to know about LEDs or light emitting diodes. That's what LED stands for if you didn't know. There's one pin that's short and there's one pin that's longer. The shorter pin is your negative terminal. So again, remember I was talking about this going from the negative source. You always want to make sure your smaller pin or shorter pin for your LED is in the negative side. Then your larger pin is on the positive side. So that's something, if you didn't know about LEDs, they always have negative and positive terminals as well. So it's always important when you're using these to pay attention to that. I always get my handy little wire strippers too. This is a economy version that you can use this little screw to actually attach. And then that way, when you actually put it together, you can actually get an exact wire cut each and every time. I've also used this for stripping. Sometimes students struggle with this, so you want somebody that can actually have it or a little bit better lock if you're going to use more of an economy version. So that's just something to be aware of. We have our light bulb holder. So nothing fancy about this. All we have is your light bulb goes into the certain pin like there. And I'll show you an example. You can see my little light bulb. I screw it down. And what that does is it's connecting to the bottom plate that's right here. So basically you're taking the circuit from one side, you're traveling through the pin, through the light bulb, going down to the other side and taking the electricity back through the other side. So these are great miniature bulb holders that I use for a lot of different circuits, and I'll get to explain how you can use those in a variety of different manners. And then the other thing that I have too is conductive dough. So a lot of people think, oh, well, you'd have to use just wires. No, you don't. You can actually have some fun with it and actually create some conductive dough. This is called squishy circuits. It's something that we offer, but that you can also create at home. So if you have your own recipe, and what we do is we have conductive dough and we have non-conductive dough, or a resistor, I should say, a conductor or resistor. Resistors are always in white, so it's easy to be able to see for students. But the reason why I like using conductive dough is because now you can actually start building circuits with them as well. So I would first roll up here, and so notice I'm putting that conductive dough on either side of the resistor, because when we want to build circuits, we don't want that path to be broken in any way, shape, or form, right? So we want to make sure that we also don't create something called a short circuit, and I'll explain what that is as well. So basically, we have our power source. We have 4 batteries. This is just got 2 leads on here. Now, remember when I was saying a negative and positive terminal, just like your battery, your negative is going to be black and your positive is going to be red. So you have 2 different panels. And what Squishy Circuits does specifically is create these nice panels that are very, very sturdy to be able to use for elementary age. So it's appropriate for elementary students to be able to use things like this. So again, I'm going to put one panel on one side of the white and one panel on the other. So now my black is on my right side, or you see my left, and then the vice versa is the positive. Now, if I turn on the power, nothing happens, right? So what we want to do is actually get our LED. And we'll notice, oh, well, wait a minute, it's not turning on. Remember what I said about LEDs, positive and negative terminals. So all you would have to do is switch it around, and then you have an actual circuit. And you can kind of see that a little bit, it kind of comes through, but this is a multicolored LED. So it's going from different colors and things of that nature. So one thing that I like to show, and why I like to use squishy circuits so much, is to show and demonstrate what happens with a short circuit. Okay, so typically you know that you would have, and again I switch it around because I didn't see physically how I set it down, that I have different colors here. Watch what happens when I put this together. It's multiple colors. Now notice, now it's just turning red or green. It's red or green, not multiple colors. I wonder why that is. Yeah, you can sort of see it, sort of not, but, and then it eventually turns off all together. So it's a little bit harder to see. I don't have a piece of paper maybe to show you, but the reason why that happens is because we're creating a short circuit. So every light bulb has something called resistance. It requires energy to be able to turn it on. And so the path is actually forcing the path of circuitry from the batteries is going to one side. It's going through the light bulb, going to the other side, and back to your power source. So it's actually creating a live circuit. When you put this squishy circuits together, what you're doing is creating a short circuit, meaning you don't no longer need to go through that resistance of the light bulb. You can go from Play-Doh or the squishy circuits right to the other squishy circuits. So it's bypassing that light bulb. Now think of this. This is a great application that you can talk about electricity taking the path of least resistance. So normally when you think about lightning, right? When the lightning strikes, what is it striking? Things that are conductive, right? The metal, other types of water, or like trees, things of that nature that have that conductor piece to it. So think about the same thing concept that you would have at home, where if you had, if you are completing the circuit to something, you might get electrocuted, right? So that's the same thing what happens in water. Like when you have like the air dryer, they don't want you putting it into the water when you're taking a shower. It's because water is conductive. What sometimes students don't understand is it actually takes about 120 volts to make water conductive. So the misconception is like students will sometimes use water as a conductor, and they're like, well, they'll use maybe a 1.5 volt battery or a 6 volt battery, and they're like, why isn't it conducting? Well, it's because you actually need more energy or more electricity to make it conductive. So that's why when you use the power at home, you have enough voltage to actually make that happen. So that's something to be aware of whenever you're using circuits or working with circuitry, that water is a conductor, but it takes more energy to make it conductive. It has a little bit more resistance than you would know. And you can test different solutions like lemon juice, water, and other different acids that to be able to use to be able to see, is it better or less conductor. So that's just something to be aware of. So again, very easy application. You can make this at home, squishy circuits. Definitely recommend it. If you didn't know, the conductive solution actually has salt. The resistor actually has sugar. And that's another thing you can actually test out as well, as salt versus sugar solutions, and see how they are versus conductor. So I always like to show those instances because it's a great demonstration tool. Other things that you might be using, wire. So a lot of people buy wire and sometimes they don't know the gauge. And what the gauge means is the thickness of the wire. So the lower the number, the thicker the wire is. So this is a 16 gauge wire. You can see it's a little bit thicker. And then you compare it to something like a 22 or maybe even a 20, I think this is a 24 or 26 gauge wire. And you can see the thickness is very different. Now I can use other pieces, but typically people for conductivity will use copper, which is fine, or they'll use copper that has enamel around it that are insulated. And what you'll need to do with that's insulated is you need to scrape off that enamel to make that conductivity piece. So you can use big rolls like this and cut off your own. I like using the thinner wire like this at 24 to 26 gauge, because when you're building bigger circuits and you start talking about electromagnetism, this is like really helpful and easy to bend and manipulate. Whereas if you had the bare wire of like an 8 or 6, it's really difficult and more rigid to be able to get those fine-tuned wrappings that you would be able to need. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of. Again, we have 6 volts. This is sometimes handy because if you have multiple light bulbs in a circuit, Sometimes a 1.5 volts or 3 volts with two 1.15 volt D batteries are not going to cut it. So sometimes a 6-volt battery will be kind of nice to be able to have. And then you also have buzzers and other different materials too, and sensors that you can use with circuits. So I like to use this, and just to demonstrate how this works, again, negative, positive terminals. It's a little buzzer theme. So again, this is a squishy circuit adapter piece. Very strong, easy to use. They sell a la carte, where the buzzers or power packs, they have switches, other different pieces here. This is sometimes easier to be able to touch against different circuits to be able to see if it's conductive. Kind of nice tool to be able to have. And then, of course, then you have other different miscellaneous supplies. Like I talked about nails, bolts are also good. Other different types of materials that you can use that are conductive, iron filings, and the list can kind of go on and on. So that's generally the supplies that I have here that are going to be demonstrating really quick. I want to kind of jump into now more of the different circuits themselves, like the series and the parallel circuits. So when we talk about parallel or series circuits, the series circuit is a single pathway for the flow of electricity from the source and back to the same source. Okay, and then the parallel is multiple pathways or a branch, otherwise sometimes referred to branch, to flow of electricity. And I really like to emphasize the definition first, because when I give students challenges, I want them to really understand and define what we're actually doing, because then they can apply that knowledge to actually what it is. And I'll give an example of that. For example, if I were to take a single battery like this, and I have a negative positive terminal, I just took one wire and I connected to the other side. I want you to kind of write in the comments right now, or the questions tabs, am I completing a series circuit? Is that a series circuit? Yes or no? So just real quick in the question box, I want you to say yes or no. I just kind of want to see whether or not you think I'm creating a series circuit with a single wire that's just attached to a battery. And I'll wait a little bit until the comments come in, because I just really want you to kind of think about that. Now remember, a series circuit is a single path for the flow of electricity. So am I creating a single circuit? Jerry, yes. Yep. Juan, yes. Yep. Maria, yes. Short circuit, yes. Kelly, very good point. You're creating a short circuit. Sema, no. Alak, no. So there's a mixed numbers. Actually the true answer is yes, I am creating a series circuit. But what I'm also doing, to the point of what Kelly said, is I'm creating a short circuit as well, because this does not have any resistance back to the source itself. And you can actually kill batteries really quickly doing this. So when you connect the terminals with just a wire like that, you are creating, and I could feel the heat a little bit from that as I was touching the fan stock clip. And you'll notice that too. If you do that at home, you notice that if you connect a wire back to here, you'll create heat. That is that short circuit happening, and you're actually disintegrating your battery. So that's something to be aware of whenever you're doing this. So again, this is a series circuit. So don't confuse trying to think that you need light bulbs or you need other different things. You're creating a single path for your circuit. So that is technically a series circuit, also known as a short circuit. Now what I can do from this is now I can attach a light bulb. And with that light bulb, you notice that there's a faint light that's happening that's from this actual light bulb here. And you can sort of see it with the 1.5 volt. Now I've used this a lot, so that it's a little bit faint. So what you can do then is, let's jump it up a notch and let's use a 6-volt battery and then see how that actually works. And notice it's much brighter, right? So you can see that how that illuminates there. And I stopped the circuit. and so again, that's a great example that you can use with the students. Now, one thing you have to be careful about when using these miniature bulbs, some of them have a certain resistance and a certain voltage maximum. So basically meaning if I were to use 12 volts with this 3-volt bulb, I would burn out the bulb. So that's something to be aware of whenever you're using something. It's the same thing at home. You have certain wattage with light bulbs or certain kind of sockets. you want to make sure you're using the appropriate wattage for the task that you're using. Too less or too more could definitely have an impact on your bulb or even your circuit itself. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. So again, series circuits, parallel circuits, that's something I wanted to speak to. Parallel circuits is a great way to also test your knowledge. What I will do with a lot of these circuits is I would give students a set of materials. I'll say, okay, you have 5 wires, you have 1 light bulb with a light bulb holder, you have 1 battery with a battery holder, and then you also have light bulb, and then I think I might throw in maybe a sensor if I have it or something else, or maybe even throw in a switch. And I'll say, based on those set of supplies, create as many series circuits that you can. And so again, it comes back to that definition of what is a series circuit. So you can create a lot of circuits by just using multiple wires. So if I created one series circuit this way, if I use 2 wires and connected back, that's another series circuit. If I use 3 wires, if I use 5 wires, if I use 1 wire with 1 light bulb and then connected it, if I use 2 wires, if I use 3 wires, those are all different types of circuits that you're creating with different supplies. So you can see how this can start ramping up a lot, and that's what I would use with students. So I would have them use a piece of paper, write down exactly how many they did, what they tried, and then I would first do it individually, then work as a pair, and then work as a group, and see collectively how many they can come up with. And then kind of go back to that definition again. What is a series circuit? And then kind of have them really understand that. And then you jump to the parallel circuits once they have to do that. Do the same exact challenge, add a couple more wires because you're adding some other different pathways that you need to create, and creating a true parallel circuit is a little bit more difficult. Now, for example, so if I use a battery source where I use multiple wires on them, so if I were to create a multiple branch on one side where I have 2 wires, but on my other side, I only have 1 wire, technically this is not a parallel circuit, only because if I were to take this wire away and this was my only power source, then there's no way for the circuit to actually complete. So that's something to be aware of too. You always need about 2 branches, because if I take a wire from anywhere on your circuit, that will disconnect or break your circuit, and then it's no longer a parallel circuit. It's just like that Christmas lights we used to have, right? When growing up, 1 bulb went out and then all the bulbs went out. That was so frustrating. That's because it was a series circuit. They got smart over time. They said, well, why are we creating a series circuit? Let's just create multiple branches and create a parallel circuit. And then when 1 bulb goes out, you can just easily see where it is and just replace it. So it's the same kind of relativity that you can use. Students nowadays are not going to be able to understand that as much, so I wouldn't use it as reference for young students. But that's something, if you did have some older Christmas lights, I would pull those out and be able to use that with my students. So that's another real easy task that you could be able to use. So let's go jump back to our PowerPoint presentation. I want to get into electromagnets a little bit. So electromagnets are widely used components, different devices, motors, generators, electromechanical solenoids. Basically, what solenoids are, and I apologize, I got a dry mouth. Talking a lot in this short time, which is okay. So solenoids are basically closely wrapped wire that are tightly wound that when current is produced through them, they create a magnetic field. And that's what electromagnets are really. And so when I was talking about using wire that is thinner, it's a little bit easier to wrap a lot of these different wires together. Now with students that are a little bit younger, you can still do these experiments. I wouldn't get into the technical aspect about what electromagnet is, but I would help them give instructions to build them. So to kind of have them a little idea. So basically what I would do is you can use a straw and use a little nail that you can use to kind of put that in there to kind of have a little bit more edge to it. And then you would tightly wind the wire all around that straw there and slowly go down. And then I would tape it so that I would have a tight materials there. So all you would have to do then after you have your tightly wound materials. And I got a magnetic ball here that I was going to test out to kind of show you what I mean is that I will connect my two wires, negative and positive, to my electromagnet. And as I produce energy through it, I should be able to have some kind of attraction. Now it's a little bit harder, and I might not have as strong of a electromagnet, which is okay. So I've got my wires here. Ooh, that's red hot. So I might be having a short circuit here a little bit, which is okay. So that's something to be aware of, and I am probably creating one right now. But usually I would take something that's a little bit bigger and more robust, and then I would put my nail through it, and then I would create electromagnets to be able to pick up certain supplies. So basically all I'm doing is I have conductive material wire that's not actually touching anything other than being completed in my circuit. And then I am taking that and actually connecting this. So now I picked up a paper clip with this electromagnet. So again, running current electricity through this wire, and then that magnetic field is being produced by that nail. Now if I pull this off, notice that there's no more current electricity, but it's still there because of I created electromagnet. And if I were to shake or push on it a little bit, it would just easily fall off. So that's something to build. So there's different strategies in building electromagnets, and some teachers have trouble with this, and that's okay. That's sometimes typical. Just because if you don't understand what electromagnet is or how to increase or decrease the strength of one, it can be a little difficult. So one of the things you have to do is have some sort of material inside. In this case, I'm just using an iron nail, and iron is a great source to be able to use the middle. And I would test that out. I would use the same thing with just air, nothing in the middle, and test, does it really connect? No. What if I used wood? No, that's a substance, but it's not magnetic or metal. And so then I would use the nail, and then they would eventually see, oh, wow, it actually connects and it actually creates an electromagnet. This is a great way to be able to show that the inside of your electromagnet, it really matters about the materials in here. The second thing that you really have to worry about is the amount of windings, right? So if I have only like 10 windings, if I got this little bit of windings here, that's not going to produce much of anything. It really isn't. It's not really that strong. You have to have a lot of windings. So I even showed a little bit of like this too. Even though they're tightly wound, it's not doing anything. It has to be tightly wound. And the great way to show that is through my little bell demonstrator here. So in here, you have two solenoids that are tightly wound together that are attached to be able to make the bell operate. So this probably has at least 100 plus at least windings. And I would start with a minimum of about 50 tight winds to be able to create that electromagnet or that solenoid that you want to be able to do. And then start with 50, then I would test with 100 and then 150, or maybe you want to go 50, 150, 200. It kind of depends on you, what you want to do. Use your iron nail. Like I said, you can use a straw and wrap around there. You can use a bolt to wrap around to make your electromagnet. You want it tight enough where it'll stay, but not stick to it. So you can pull out the bolt or the nail so you can test it inside of materials. But that's one way to be able to also test out your electromagnet as well. And then the other thing is the type of wire, or also, the third thing that you want to test is strength. So we tested the windings, we tested the inside electromagnet. The last thing is the amount of voltage. A lot of people think that, well, it's the amount of voltage. What it actually is the amount of amperage. The amperage is the power behind it. So voltage is the electricity that it has, but the amperage is the oomph, the push that voltage through your circuit. So that's something to be aware of whenever you're building electromagnets, is that you want more amperage. So instead of having 6 volts, maybe I have 2 6 volts in a parallel circuit to push energy through my electromagnet. So that's something to be aware of as well. So a nice thing to experiment, we sell different devices like this, like a little bell that you can use. And how this actually works is there's a little push and pull mechanism that rapidly happens in succession where it opens and closes and hits this bell to make it operate. So when I actually create the circuit, it's rapidly pushing and pulling this little lever to hit the bell to make that ringing sound. So I will kind of show you what it sounds like if you actually get it operating. And now I'll sometimes give teachers or students this to say, can you operate the bell based on this? And so they'll navigate it. This is after they've learned how the basic circuitry work. So again, put it connected to them. And of course, when they start getting it working, they just get excited. They're like, whoa, we got the bell working, you know, and then you'll hear it too. And then you'll go to them and be able to say, oh, how did you get the bell to work? And there's two different ways. There's these two different screws on there. So your one is grounding and one is actually getting the circuit to actually produce the energy through there that you actually need to be able to operate this. But again, this is a nice little easy cover that you can put on. It snaps right back on to use to be able to demonstrate with students for circuitry, or also building electromagnets or talking about that. So I think that's what I wanted to be able to cover for electromagnets. Again, I'm sorry if I'm going quickly. I want to cover everything. So I did magnets, I did some circuitry, I did some electromagnets. The things I want to consider when you're doing these different projects. So locate as many different magnets as possible at home, or circuitry supplies, or whatever you're using. That's what you really want to emphasize, is whenever you're doing this at home, use the materials that you have, but understand that you may not have access to certain ones. So you maybe want to supplement it or things of that nature. I find that usually for education purposes, it's circuitry and magnetism is one of the more expensive units, just because usually you need some sort of supplies. This is where I sometimes go and defer to squishy circuits or some other things that might be a little bit less expensive, because you can just build up your recipe and then you don't need some wires, but you can easily use these at home with some inexpensive LEDs or some other things. The only downside with using squishy circuits is that it will corrode your pins. So if you leave it in for long periods of time, it'll eventually corrode them. So that's something to be aware of. That's why another benefit of using these paddles is they don't corrode as easily. But if you leave them on for long periods of time, you'll notice that they'll sometimes corrode right onto the panels themselves. Now, this was used for like an 8-hour conference each day for 3 days. And you can see that over time, it kind of corrodes. And that's because when you're talking to customers, you don't always have time to check on it. So normally I would switch it out. Other things that would happen to your dough is to dry out as you're putting electricity through it. It's constantly using up that energy or the conductivity piece within squishy circuits. So that's something else to be aware of. The other thing you want to think about, are all students going to be able to participate? So some students might have the kinesthetic ability to be able to use these fine-tuned motor skills, like these little wires or building little circuits, things like that nature. So you want to make sure that it's appropriate for your grade level, and then you're including all students. You might have to show a video first of something, or create a video yourself of building the circuit and explaining how some of this works prior to sending the lesson over. So that's something to think about as well. Always gauge your students for difficulty and modify as needed. So that's the other thing. So some students I find will really gravitate this quickly, they pick up on it, they have fun, and they just run with it. And I typically challenge those more with those students that, hey, open-ended question, how many series circuits can you build, parallel circuits, et cetera, that they can do to be able to get them to the next level. And then the last thing is, don't expect perfection when creating your own challenge activities. Now, the misconceptions that a lot of students have is basically how circuits work. They first have to understand the fundamental rules of, if there's a pathway broken anywhere, it doesn't matter if it's the light bulb, the wiring of the actual the material that holds the connectivities, anywhere, that is going to break your circuit. And once they start understanding and how to test those different things, they're going to come better. So for example, what I'll do sometimes is, after I build a circuit, I'll change out the light bulb of the same circuit, and then the light bulb won't light up. And I'll be like, what happened? And then they'll be like, well, it's off. Well, why is it off? And they'll say, well, the circuit was just working. Why is it not working now? And think about, what did I change, or what did I do differently to that circuit that made it not work? And so they get some thinking about the light bulb. Oh, well, maybe the light bulb isn't working, or it burnt out. Sometimes I'll put that on students that are just for assessment purposes. I'll give them a circuit that I'll have them test out, and I'll have it with a dead light bulb, but I won't show that it works, right? So that's a good assessment tools to see, hey, are they checking the wires? Are they checking the connectivity? Are they checking the bulb holders? Are they checking the battery? Maybe the battery's dead, so I'll give them extra battery, or I'll give them extra light bulb, and things of that nature. So to be able to manipulate and test out, because that's an open-ended almost like a summative or formative assessment that you could use at the very end of your unit if you wanted to. And it could be for challenge students, or you can scale down for other students. So that's, again, some different things that you can use. And magnetism and the magnets are pretty somewhat self-explanatory for as far as use and the purposes, but there's things that you can do there as well as far as testing the materials and understanding, okay, does it matter if a magnet is a horseshoe versus a bar magnet? What is stronger and why? If they're both Alnico magnets, they're both the same size, a horseshoe magnet should work better than the bar magnet, and it's because both the poles are both on each side, and it's easier to be able to use to be able to increase the strength. But those are things that you can test out and be able to use with your students to be able to see all these different kinds of challenges. So again, I really wanted to emphasize those things to kind of consider. The next slide is basically talking about engagement. So all these different things that we have is focusing on engagement, getting our students active. The more hands-on you are, the more interactive you are with the circuits and all the materials they have, the more they see, the more that they do, the better off they're going to be and be able to apply that knowledge to real-world applications. Tie it into circuitry at home. What about the lamps? And what about other devices we're plugging in? Your phones and your laptops, your computers all have magnets or solenoids in them. All these different things are all being applicable all around us, but you got to pull that into them so they can better understand those concepts that are key topics for them. So if you have any questions, now is the time to be able to answer those. We're going to go through those. We got about like 3 to 5 minutes here that I want to be able to kind of go through some of the different questions. I'm going to go through here. Is this being recorded and can we see it later? Deborah, yes, I want to emphasize again, after this webinar, if you came in halfway or had difficulties, it is being recorded. There's a survey after I want you to fill out too as well, that you'll have access to afterwards, about an hour or two after the webinar. When I am explaining a short circuit, I say it is like creating a freeway for the electrons to travel from one side of the battery to the other. The electrons go screamingly fast and can heat the wire to the point that it can burn your finger. Lynn, that's a great example. Absolutely. So kind of explaining what is happening, why is it heating up, what is happening to those electrons happening in that solution. So it's a great demonstration. I appreciate you for sharing that, Lynn, because short circuits is one of those kind of ideas of short circuit. Is it really a circuit? Is it not a circuit? And what happens if you have a short circuit? It's the same thing as why we have electrical fires at home, right? Why do we have fuses? It's because if those circuits overheat, like creating a short circuit, it breaks the fuse breaks. And we actually have fuse wire that we use in some of our investigation kits that you can see actually light up and actually break apart. That's a great example that you can use to be able to show students on how that actually heats up. So fuses and why do fuse boxes at home, why do circuits break, or why do you have a circuit breaker? Those are great ways to explain why short circuits happen and why fires happen and why we use other measures to prevent those as well. Kim, what age levels would these activities be suited for? So most likely electricity and magnetism is starting right anywhere from like magnets are usually sometimes as low as like maybe 1st or 2nd grade. Circuitry, you're getting into more 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. You can even get into middle school and high school depending on the applications with it. And then electromagnetism is one of those more advanced. You can get at the upper level of the elementary level, but I would say that's more middle school than to the high school level. But they get into like Ohm's law and actually calculating the electricity, the joules and everything else that's involved with there. They're just taking it the next step further. This is more like the basic set of getting you started from elementary more into the middle school level. But then you can get from the middle school to high school level beyond that. But I've had high schoolers that have little to no knowledge about circuitry. So when they're starting to build simulated homes and things of that nature, they might start here. This is your basics, because you have to get the basics first and the fundamentals before you can actually start advancing students to more in-depth knowledge or concepts for them. What is an example of SMCO magnet? So this is a great example. I didn't get into these specifically, those, but Maria, I'll contact you specifically about those a little bit later. This is a magnet I just wanted to kind of show everyone. Can I get a list of supplies used? Frankly, Yes, absolutely. What I can do is get a list of supplies. If you want to order from Nasco, that's great. We do offer that for you, but this was more for at home. If you had supplies around, what you could do with some simple different experiments. If you have any questions, reach out to me at Jordan Nelson. I'm Jordan Nelson at jnelson@nascoeducation.com. NascoEducate.com is where all of our resources are for all of our different lessons, our PD webinars, if there's upcoming for July. So stay tuned to that if you like this. And then give me feedback too. If you want to see something else or get more specific in any different materials, let me know. That's how it's going to help better improve these different webinars. So I hope you learned a little bit about science, about magnets, circuitry, and electromagnetism. I hope you had some fun with me. Let me know of your feedback and stay tuned for other upcoming webinars. Thank you much for joining me.